In the age of the live-action film adaptation of just about everything Hollywood can get its hands on, I suspect there are studios or streaming services just waiting to pounce on the wealth of Japanese video game IPs sitting untouched and untainted by Hollywood. Now, I'm not trying to suggest that all video game adaptations have to be bad, but let's be honest, most of them have either been bad or mediocre at best. So, I decided to take some time in this video and speculate on the creative team and the director who could actually bring this type of project to life. There are a good number of potential candidates who could realistically take on such a burdensome task. A few of the directors who I'd love to see take a crack at the enchanting mythos of Final Fantasy include Guillermo del Toro, James Cameron, and Shinsuke Saito. That last name might not immediately ring a bell with you, but Saito is someone who has plenty of experience in adapting manga and anime stories. My friend recently showed me Saito's Bleach adaptation. It was surprisingly authentic, straightforward, and entertaining. Barring one or two off-key decisions, it was a really solid live-action take on that storyline. I actually wouldn't mind seeing a sequel. As for the other names on the list, let's talk through why each one could be capable of producing a good adaptation of such a beloved IP. Guillermo del Toro is someone who himself enjoys video games. He's friends with Hideo Kojima, and has repeatedly praised the artistry of the gaming industry. I feel like he is someone who would really try to represent the spirit and magic of Final Fantasy on the big screen. Of course, in the inevitable outcome that some big studio would want to intervene and mess with a movie like this, Del Toro is a perfect candidate for being an advocate, protecting the integrity of the license to the best of his abilities. Del Toro's experience with character-driven fantasy stories is a perfect fit for the likes of Final Fantasy. A director with his imagination, attention to detail, and ability to collaborate would be icing on the cake for a project like this. Now, with a name like James Cameron, one could suppose he sounds like a pipe dream director for a project like a Final Fantasy movie. But his portfolio of success in handling large-scale productions is definitely up to snuff. His ambition to push the medium forward through development of new filmmaking techniques, effects, and technology has been a staple of his directing style. This makes me wonder what he could achieve if given creative control of a property like Final Fantasy. Imagine the world he could construct, whether the film would be an adaptation or not. Now, in a realistic sense, Cameron would likely not be an available option due to his commitment to finishing the Avatar movies. I mean, with filming still underway on some of the remaining sequels, it's conceivable that the director wouldn't be open to anything else until all of those movies see release. Which, given the way the releases are being handled as of now, that could be another 10 years. Now, I mentioned before Shinsuke Saito, and he is the third director on my list. He might not strike a chord with many of you, but he's local talent from Japan and has a lot of experience working on adaptations of popular Japanese IPs. I already mentioned how I enjoy his Bleach adaptation. The combination of visual and practical effects made the fight scenes in that movie stand out and have a unique visual language. I would love to see what he could do with a big budget Final Fantasy movie. Maybe it could be considered a big leap to go from manga or anime to do something as large scale as Final Fantasy. But I do think he has enough experience, so I would really like to see him given a shot on a project of this size. You know though, I can't really talk about a Final Fantasy movie without discussing what its subject matter could be about. If a big studio actually decided to grab hold of the license, what direction could they take the project? Would they do a straight adaptation of a previously released game? Or would they decide to break new ground and invent an entirely new story for the big screen? With either of those options, an entirely new set of questions and complications occur. On top of that issue, which game could be best adapted into a movie? Which would likely have to be no longer than 2.5 hours. I mean, Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9, 10, and 12 all pretty much have large, expansive storylines. Could a movie really do justice to any of those stories in such a limited amount of time? I'm not saying it's impossible, but it would be quite difficult to not end up cutting out fan favorite moments, especially in some of the aforementioned games where the storylines extend past 40 or 50 hours. So as you start to get into this, you realize adapting one of the games would be incredibly difficult to do in a feature film. Thus, I've come to the conclusion that if a Final Fantasy movie were attempted, it should be an original story altogether. When you remember that each successive entry in the franchise is its own world and story, it makes sense that a film should do the same. Create new worlds, new characters, and of course more crystals. Whether it be sci-fi or medieval fantasy, I would be fine with either or anything in between. Personally, for a project of this kind, I believe the best place to look for inspiration is the past. Go back to some of the early Final Fantasy games. My reason behind this is that modern Final Fantasy games have a much different feel about them than the original entries in the series. I think it would be cool to have two distinctly different feels to a Final Fantasy universe. One on the silver screen could be unique, while the games continue to straddle the line between the best of old with the best of new. Also, there would be a sense of nostalgia for many to see a Final Fantasy movie lean heavily into Sakaguchi's heritage. Even a concept as standard as the Warrior of Light would go a long way in generating excitement. Of course, I do have some wishlist items, which I'm sure any fan does. The first is that I feel it's important for Square Enix to have people currently involved with Final Fantasy act as creative consultants to guide the production in the right direction. Hollywood, when given too much power and too much freedom, tends to lose focus on the real picture. Enter Godzilla 1998, am I right? You might be asking yourself, he's not about to suggest what I think he's going to suggest, is he? No, I'm not about to say let Tetsuya Nomura be the creative consultant. I mean, for Pete's sake, the guy is working on like a bazillion other projects right now. However, I'll admit there's a part of me which would love to see the character designs for a Final Fantasy movie done by Nomura. Despite his designs having been hit or miss with fans as of late, Nomura would definitely do a better job of honoring the styled legacy of the franchise more than Hollywood designers. Perhaps having a voice like, say, Yoshinori Kitase could also benefit the production, someone who's been around for a long time and someone who actually worked with Sakaguchi. I'm not suggesting he's the only one, but it would be comforting to know there was someone with creative input coming from Japan, and more importantly, from within Square Enix. Though they were brief, you've heard my thoughts. Why don't you let me know in the comments down below what you'd like to see in a Final Fantasy movie, or whether or not they should even make one at all. I'm anxious to see what everyone says. And again, thank you guys so much for tuning into this video. I apologize for the delay in getting this one out, but I'm glad it's finally done and that you guys were able to take a look at it. If this is your first time visiting the channel and you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, hitting the like button, and possibly sharing it around so others can see it as well. Thanks again for your time, and have a great day.